even tribes that practice cannibalism actually do believe in the maxim, you shall love your neighbor as yourself. But they don't regard people in other tribes as their neighbor. So they are willing to cannibalize them, but they would not cannibalize somebody in their own tribe. They have a fundamental common moral code, but it's differently interpreted and culturally conditioned. Similarly, other values may be underlying these, but they may have different cultural expressions. But in any case, the point is that on atheism, you see, none of these things can be objectively condemned or praised, because on atheism, we are completely lost in sociocultural relativism. We are just animals on the atheistic view, and animals are not moral agents. So when Nazi war criminals or terrorists or even Christians perpetrate atrocities, the atheist can no more condemn these than he can condemn a lion eating its young or a great white shark raping and copulating with a female. These kinds of actions like rape and murder go on all the time in the animal kingdom. But they're not considered rape and murder because they have no moral quality to them. And if we are in a world without God, we are just animals, and these have no moral quality for us either. Wow.
I've been waiting to use that.
Okay.
Can we have now the first question?
Sorry, you have a response.
Thank you, yes.
Please go ahead.
Yes, thank you, because there are two things that I'd like to say about that. The first thing is that Dr. Craig's response to this very good question seems to imply that you could exculpate anybody at all of any crime. Let us take, for example, the Nazis. If the cannibals were all right and they actually obeyed the Ten Commandments on the grounds that they didn't consider other tribes their neighbors, then equally we could say that the Nazis did not disobey the commandment not to kill because they didn't regard Jews as human beings, which clearly they didn't. The second point I want to make is, of course, that there isn't the slightest reason to think that moral values get their objectivity from our obligations to God. Or if there is, then why not just say moral values get their objectivity from our obligations to each other? Thank you. That's all.
Fine, thank you. I think we can then move on to the second question. This one needs to be addressed to Arif. Yes.
Could you tell me what you know, what you believe, and what you apply?
Could you just repeat the question, because I need to put it into the...
Could you tell me what you know by the meaning of the categories, what you know, what you believe, and what you apply?
Would you mind repeating the question as you understand
Yes.
it? It would help me, thank you.
The question as I understood it was that I was being asked to distinguish between those things that I know, those things that I believe to be true, and those things that I opine. Yes? Okay, well, if I take the distinction between belief and opining simply to mean the distinction between beliefs that I hold firmly and beliefs that I hold tentatively, then I would say the things I know are the things for which I have empirical evidence, i.e. the testimony of my senses. The things that I believe are the things for which my senses give me some reasonable degree of believing them, plus various other things that I happen to believe which I recognize to be unreasonable, as Hume showed. The things that I opine are various matters of speculation. So I may opine that it's going to rain tomorrow, and I certainly opine that Australia will win the Ashes because I put a bit of money on it recently. But I hope those examples give you an answer to the kind of thing you want. If the question is, do I know, believe, or opine in the existence of God, if that's the question, then my answer is, I have as good reason for not believing in God's existence as I have for anything.
Fine, thank you.
I think this might be a good opportunity for me to respond to the point about the role of reason in knowing that God exists. I think what Dr. Ahmed did was really take my statements out of context in the book. What I'm defending there is what's been called a Holy Spirit epistemology, which says that on the basis of the witness of the Holy Spirit in one's heart, God gives you a veridical experience of himself, and that in the absence of some defeater of that, we are quite rational to accept that belief as true. Alvin Plantinga has defended this epistemology most eloquently in his book, Warranted Christian Belief. And Plantinga gives the illustration of someone who is accused of a crime that he knows he didn't commit, even though all the evidence is against him, so that others would convict him if he were in a court of law. Plantinga says, must that person believe in his own guilt on the basis of the evidence, even though he knows he didn't do it? Well, obviously not. His knowledge of his own innocence It makes it rational for him to believe in his innocence despite the evidence. And my point was that given the way evidence shifts in history and different cultures and times, there may be times and places in history where the evidence turns against Christianity, but for a person who knows the Holy Spirit, that would be an overriding reason to believe.
Fine. I think we lost the track of the time a tiny bit there, but probably only by about 10 or 15 seconds. We are on to the next question, which is going to be addressed to you again, Bill.
All right.
So I'm looking, I think, probably from this side of the room this time. There's another question this time for Bill. Yes.
Yes.
So that life was created. So is God interested in fine-tuning human mind?
Is God interested what?
Is God interested in doing the fine-tuning of human mind? And if that is the case, why did he fail in case of fine-tuning of the minds of Hitler and Mussolini? And I'm not quite sure about the fine-tuning of the mind of George Bush.
Can you repeat the question?
Yes, he asked, if God is interested in fine-tuning, is he interested in fine-tuning human minds? And the answer is no. God isn't interested in puppets or marionettes. He gives people freedom of the will to do as they should choose. But that doesn't escape this fine-tuning argument I gave, which is about the extraordinary fine-tuning of the universe and its initial conditions for intelligent life. You simply cannot responsibly deny the fact of fine-tuning. As Martin Rees, the astronomer royal, said, I quoted him, this is everywhere in physics. John Barrow gives the following illustration. He says, what you would do is represent our universe on a piece of paper as a red dot. Then you would alter slightly some of these constants and quantities, and that would be a new universe. If it's a life-permitting universe, you make it another red dot. If it's a life-prohibiting universe, you make it a blue dot. And then you do it again, and do it again, and do it again. And Barrow says, what you will find at the end of this exercise is a sheet of blue with only a couple of pinpricks of red. That's what is meant by the fine-tuning. And this is a fact of science that you simply can't avoid. It's indisputable. The question is, how do you best explain it? It can't be due to physical necessity because these are initial conditions. They're independent of the laws of nature. Notice I'm not talking about logical possibility. That was Dr. Ahmed's only escape in his last rebuttal, that these are just logical possibilities. We're talking here about the physical range of possibilities for these constants and quantities. And then we're talking about the life-permitting range. And it's so extraordinary, this can't be explained either by natural necessity or by simple chance. So we're still left here without a good explanation from the atheist for the fine-tuning of the universe. I think the best explanation is the universe appears to be fine-tuned because it was. It was designed by an intelligent, transcendent designer.
Fine, thank you. Can I have your response to that, please?
Yes, thank you. Briefly, I'll say the following things. First of all, Dr. Craig, as we've seen, has yet again resorted to a metaphor. This time it was the metaphor of the little blue dots and the red dot on the piece of paper. I would like to see what that actually literally means. Typically, our evidence for saying that one thing is very unlikely or is very likely is through frequency on repeated trials. We haven't got any repeated trials, so why is it likely? The second point is that he says that I've made the mistake of appealing to logical rather than to physical probabilities, physical possibilities. And if you take all the physically possible universes, then you get a much larger range. Well, that just seems to me to be fallacious. A, I don't see any reason to think all of these universes are physically possible. There may be cosmological theories on which they're not. And B, even in my coin example, I could give you as many physically possible ways the coin could land as you like. It could land on its side at one angle, it could land on its side at a slightly different angle, or at yet another slightly different angle. All of these things are physically possible equilibria states for the coin, and yet there are millions of them. So Dr. Craig can't get me on that one. Thank you.
So we're now on to the next question, which is going to be addressed to Arif. I can see somebody sitting here, and then I should go to the back for my next group of questions. So can I ask you to ask yours? Thank you.
Is there something that you do that you justify
Could you repeat the question again?
Yes, the question as I understood it was, is there something which I believe that I know for certain, for example, that 2 + 2 = 4, and if it were the case that everybody who told me that I was wrong on that, would I change my mind? Okay, again, so was that not quite right? Yes.
If you felt you could defer judgment on that, would you say that that was a non-human quality? Would you say that it's not natural more of a phenomenology to reject that?
Yes, okay, thank you.
Can you repeat that bit again?
Yes, the question was whether my coming to a judgment on that or not would or would not be a human quality, yes. Okay, so there are 3 things I want to say to that. First of all, there are, of course, things that I know pretty much for certain, as certain as I can be. For example, that 2 + 2 = 4. And the reason that I know that 2 + 2 = 4 is simply because I've looked on my fingers. But another good reason, if you wanted one, really, was its logical provability. And I could show you, if you wanted, how it could be proved by logic. The second question would be, if it were the case that everybody else said I was wrong, would I think I was wrong? Well, even in a case like that, there are such things as herd instincts, there are such things as power of suggestion. There are very many cases, the Milgram experiment is one of them, where what happens is people behave or believe in certain ways simply because of the power of their fellows. Now, I can't speak for my own independence of mind in case of such adverse circumstances, and I wouldn't want to predict it. The third thing that I want to say is that even though that's so, that doesn't make it, in some cases, always rational to stick to what you're sure of. There are plenty of things that we're sure of, but we don't have the slightest reason to believe, I think, and therefore it's simply a feature of our animal natures that we believe them. This is a slightly separate issue. I mean, I could discuss Hume, who showed this quite conclusively, I think, later on if you wanted, but the point I'm making now is that it is a regrettable but inevitable feature of our human nature that there are some things we believe but can't help believing. Religion isn't one of them. We can drop it.
Thank you.
Well,
you have 1 minute.
I don't have anything to say about that question, so let me use my minute to respond to what Dr. Ahmed said in response to my argument from the beginning of the universe. He agrees with the first premise that anything that comes into being must have a cause. Now, has he given you any good reason to think that the universe did not begin to exist? I gave the philosophical argument against the possibility of an actually infinite number of things, and he simply insisted here that subtraction is not well defined for transfinite numbers. But the reason it's not is because you get self-contradiction. So this is prohibited with transfinite numbers, and I do know what I'm talking about here. But in reality, if things exist in reality, it's easy to subtract them. So it follows from that to avoid contradictions, there cannot be an actual infinite number of things. Moreover, we've got tremendous evidence from contemporary cosmology for the origin of the universe from absolutely nothing. And every attempt to avoid this has failed. So if Dr. Ahmed is really as open to the evidence as he claims that he is, he ought to believe that second premise, that the universe began to exist. It is clearly more probable than it's contradictory. And it seems to me that he ought to therefore accept the existence of a transcendent creator.
You just escaped my gong. So the next question is going to come to you, Bill, and I'm going to look at the back half of the audience this time. Yes, with the fairer hair just behind in the red shirt. Yep, that's you.
Yes.